Golden Child. Chapter 3. I'm ready, Rapunzel said, leaving her room. Colden only meant to glance up and see what she did with her hair, but then he saw she had changed her outfit completely. She wore a dark green dress instead of the pink dress from before, reminding him of evergreen trees. Her hair was pulled back into a braid, and she no longer looked like the young, naive girl. Since the dress was shorter than the one from before, he noticed she had no shoes. Do you not have any shoes?" he asked, looking down at her bare feet. She stared at her feet, wiggling her toes. "I never needed them." Then, her eyes brightened with a thought. "Oh, my mother has some." She rushed up a set of stairs and into the attic where Gothel stayed. She grabbed a pair of sandals in a closet and slipped them on. She ran back down and caught her breath. "Is that better?" Colden shrugged. "It should work. Now, hold on tight." He approached her, and one of her feet instinctively stepped back. Quickly, he scooped her up into a princess carry. She squeaked with surprise but then wrapped her arms around his neck as he stood on the window ledge. He jumped out, and they fell downward. Rapunzel looked from him to the ground, noting he didn't have his wings revealed. "Hey! Why are you?" she began. Then his ice-like wings appeared, and he flew up at the last possible second. She held on tighter while screaming, "Are you crazy?" He winked at her. "You bet." His eyes scanned the thick clouds. "Now, let's see. If we just fall, then we should go exactly where we want." "Fall," she shouted, staring at him with wide eyes. He grinned at her, then stopped flapping his wings, letting them free fall once again. She screamed while he laughed, getting a thrill from every moment. They broke through the clouds, and then Rapunzel saw the green forests and grasses. Her screams stopped as she soaked it in, the beauty she had only been told about. How could this world be full of evil? Like before, when they got close to the ground, Colden saved them from becoming pancakes. He landed them safely on the outskirts of Amishi. She jumped out of his arms and immediately collapsed on the grass. It was not as soft as she thought it would be. Instead, it was prickly and scratchy. She hopped back up, remembering she was supposed to be angry. "Never, ever, do that again. We almost died twice." "Yeah, but it was fun, wasn't it?" Rapunzel pursed her lips, not wanting to admit it had been the best form of adrenaline she ever experienced. But she didn't have to answer because her eyes landed on the castle of Amishi in the distance. She tugged on Colden's arm before pointing at the White Palace. "Is this the place from the story? It's so massive and clean. Can we take a tour of it? Is that allowed?" Colden slowly removed her arm from his jacket. "Hold your horses. We can't just walk inside a castle. I only took you here to show you the place. Besides, your mother would be upset that you stepped foot in Amishi. This is where the witch hunting began." Rapunzel bit her bottom lip as she stared at the castle, and her perception of it changed drastically. It had gone from dreamland to a death sentence. "Then where is Effa?" she asked. "It isn't that far from here." Their close borders were another major reason these two kingdoms clashed. "May I?" Rapunzel allowed him to pick her back up again, and they flew off over the tops of the forest. Soon, night fell, and Colden couldn't keep flying around with Rapunzel in his arms. He touched the ground in the forest and set her down. "We'll walk from here. We should be there by morning even if we stop for 2 hours to rest. You okay with that?" Rapunzel nodded. "I don't think I could sleep if I tried." She jogged a little, but Colden didn't bother to keep up with her. He knew the girl would stop to study whatever she came across, like a toad, which she kept with her in her hands as they traveled. Then, they came across a small pond. Rapunzel dipped a toe in before submerging both feet in the water with her sandals still on. She stared at the water, wondering what it would be like to float on top of it. In one of her books, the protagonist relaxed in a spring during his travels, and Rapunzel wanted to do the same. Colden tilted his head and asked, "Have you ever been swimming before?" Rapunzel broke away from her thoughts, setting the toad down on a rock. It immediately hopped off. "No, of course not. I live in a tower, after all. Do you know how to swim? Will you teach me?" she asked, sloshing out of the water while she tried to hide her excitement. Colden didn't want to get in, not even a toe. No pretty face could convince him. "Do you really want your clothes getting wet?" Rapunzel crossed her arms. "I am not swimming in my underclothes or naked. Especially with you here." Colden sighed, pressing a hand to his forehead. "No, I didn't mean it like that. Let's call it a pass and move on. There are better things than swimming." He walked off, away from the pond. Rapunzel still stood where he left her. She watched how the water glittered. She really wanted to try swimming, but she knew she didn't want him to see her in her underclothes. An idea popped into her head. "What if we rested here for 2 hours?" she shouted to him, lifting her head. Colden stopped. His shoulders sank, and she could tell he didn't like the idea. That was when she figured out the truth. "You're scared of water, aren't you?" she shouted, amused. Colden flew over to her and covered her mouth with his hand. No one was around to hear, but it was still embarrassing. "Shush. I am not scared of water." Rapunzel tried speaking with his hand still over her mouth. It came out in mumbles and grunts. He looked confused, so she pushed his hand away. "Then why all the hurry to avoid it?" "I am not scared of water," he repeated grumpily. "You can tell me." "It's all right. I told you. I am not scared." Rapunzel smiled and turned sharply, smacking him with her hair. She sat down on a rock by the pond. "Then you won't mind if we rest here," she said. He took a super big breath in, and through gritted teeth, he said, "Fine, but I am not swimming." Colden stiffly sat on the opposite side of her, leaning against a tree. Rapunzel waited him out until he was fast asleep. She smiled and stripped down to her underclothes. Ultimately, she decided to leave it at that. Surely, her underclothes would dry within 2 hours. Quietly, she went into the water. Its cool touch excited her. She kept walking until the water reached her chin. Then she put her whole head in and popped back out laughing. This awakened Colden with a start. He jumped to his feet and ran over to get a better look at the pond. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Rapunzel turned around, a bit shocked and embarrassed now that he was awake. "Relaxing," she said unsurely. "You don't know how to swim. You could drown." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, why are you telling me what to do? Aren't you a rule breaker? You're a duke's son or whatever. Surely you're supposed to be elsewhere instead of here." Colden stepped closer to the pond but never to the point where his shoes touched the water. "Yes, I should be apologizing to a king right now, but that didn't sound like much fun. And for your information, I pull pranks and sometimes fly recklessly, but that's it. Besides, I am currently attempting to behave better. What I'm trying to say is, don't go into water when you don't know how to swim. I'm touching the bottom, all right?" "It's fine," she said. "I am a responsible person, okay?" "Responsible? You let me drag you out of your tower. Hey, we made this arrangement because you think I'm sheltered. Besides, swimming is leagues away from free falling. Before Colden could confirm Rapunzel's mother kept her under a rock, Rapunzel abruptly disappeared under the water. Colden shouted out her name before he dove into the water. He reluctantly forced his eyes open in the murky depths, catching sight of Rapunzel in the deeper end. He quickly swam to her and wrapped one arm around her waist. He swam upward, and they gasped for air when they reached the surface. She wrapped her arms around his neck as he brought them to the shallow area. They both sloshed out of the pond and fell onto the muddy bank. "Why did I suggest this again?" Colden asked, pushing back his white bangs that clung to his skin. "Because you thought I was attractive, that's why. And you enjoy laughing at people, and I have zero life experience, making me a great source of entertainment," she answered for him. Then she laughed. "I can't believe you jumped in to save me despite your aversion to water." "Again, I am not scared of water." Something tickled Rapunzel's feet. It was just the water, but she still slid closer to Colden. Looking back at him, her nose almost touched his. He stared at her, then smiled. "Are you making the moves on me right now?" he asked. "You faked being pulled under, didn't you?" Rapunzel speedily sat up, recalling she was in her undergarments, which were nothing more than an off-white linen dress and a corset. She grabbed her dress and used it to conceal herself. "What?" "I would never do that. My plan was to swim without you taking notice at all." Colden remained in the mud and rested his arm over his eyes. "Okay, but you really should be more careful. I don't know what your mother's told you, but she is right about some things." Rapunzel stared at the water again, recalling how frightening it was to be dragged under. However, she realized that wasn't what Colden was referring to, strangers and people with bad intentions. She had worried about Colden's character and motives, but he had been relatively respectful so far. He just saved her life, for goodness sake. Even now, he was shielding his eyes so she could change. She almost didn't notice the simple action since he covered them so casually. As she slipped on her dress and squeezed out her hair, Colden asked, "Did you see what dragged you under?" She gently tapped his hand with her foot. He lowered his arm from his eyes, staring up at her to listen. "I think whatever it was, you scared it off." There was a laugh from the pond, followed by a young woman's voice, "Like he could scare the likes of me away." "Yeah, right. You don't know the half of it." Rapunzel looked over at Colden, who sprang to his feet. He shook his head and waved a hand out to the girl, who lingered in the shadows. He wasn't rattled at all that someone had been listening to their conversation, while Rapunzel felt the exact opposite. "Raina," Colden said, "I'm not surprised." Slowly, a girl with dark skin swam to them. Her hair, eyes, and garment were magenta. Rapunzel gasped when she saw the equally pink mermaid tail pop briefly out of the water. Rapunzel looked back and forth between Colden and Raina. "You two know each other?" The mermaid giggled, now bobbing in the water. "Yeah, I know the fool of a fairy. He fought with my brother to prove who was smarter and better looking. However, it was agreed mermen and mermaids are far more attractive than fairies. She's the king of Una's niece. She is very controlling and just as tricky as me. She doesn't really fit in her uncle's kingdom," Colden explains. Raina slid onto the bank, and then her tail turned into a skirt and human legs. She continued out of the water, flipping her wet hair. "We are meant to be one. United as we sing, united as a kingdom. We are Baldwin's right-hand man," she said, mimicking her uncle's voice. Colden squeezed the water out of his clothes. He had heard Raina's nonsense enough and wasn't interested. Rapunzel, on the other hand, was intrigued to find out more about the merfolk world. "Really? So your kingdom is a big part of keeping peace?" Raina looked at Rapunzel and then at Colden. Is she serious? Have you started courting lunatics now? Where did you pick her up, and how is her hair so long? She's making mine look bad. A tower, he mumbled. What was that? A tower, he said more clearly. Reina's eyes went back to Rapunzel, looking her up and down. She snorted when she understood why Rapunzel was so clueless. Plus, Reina knew Colden all too well. This was something right up his alley, laughing at a girl who knew nothing of the world. So you're playing with her, is that it? Making fun of her at every turn. Letting her do dumb things a normal person wouldn't do because they know better. What a mean trick, Colden. That's pretty low. Colden's eyebrows furrowed. That is not what I'm doing. We went to see Amishi today. I didn't let her make a fool of herself and march up to the castle like she wanted to. Who do you think I am? Just leave us alone, okay? You're supposed to be in Unette anyway. Reina crossed her arms. I don't have to be anywhere besides where I choose. I will help this poor girl and travel with you, wherever that may be. Rapunzel wanted to clasp Reina's hands with happiness at having a female companion, but she resisted the urge. If that's what you want, then I'm fine with it. Traveling with a fairy and a mermaid will be fun, regardless of how strange this is. Should we head out? Wait, Rapunzel. It hasn't even been 2 hours. We can still, and she doesn't care, Colden said, watching her stride off into the forest with determination. Reina laughed and patted Colden's back. I like her decisiveness. Maybe I was wrong, and the joke is really on you. Shut up, Colden muttered. Fine, but I do have to ask, why does she think this is strange? Reina asked, walking backwards so she faced Colden. Her mother has told her the world is filled with evil. That's why I'm doing this, to show her the full truth, not pieces of it. Reina turned back around to stare at Rapunzel. So you are causing trouble. You are turning a daughter against her own mother. Colden was stunned by Reina's last comment. He never thought of it like that. Was that what he was trying to do? To prevent Rapunzel from being a good little girl and encourage her to break the rules her mother set for her safety? He decided there was more to it than that. Rapunzel's circumstances were too bizarre, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she was a prisoner whether she knew it or not.